The term synapse refers to a meeting point between two neurons. Now, although the two neurons meet, they don't actually touch or connect as such. There's a gap in between, and that gap is, that meeting point is called a synapse. So we've got labeled here in the diagram, this is our synapse here. So we can see the synapse, we've got a gap between the axon of a neuron and then a dendrite of a new neuron. So overall, we're seeing a message here in this diagram be relayed in this way. If we look over on this other side, on the sort of zoomed out picture, that's where we're seeing the impulse travel. So what happens is, once an electrical impulse makes it to the end of an axon of a neuron, it can't pass the synapse in its electrical form. So it needs to be transmitted across that synapse in chemical form. Now the chemical form that it's going to take is through something called a neurotransmitter. So these green little triangles here representing neurotransmitters. And there's a number of different types of neurotransmitters. A couple of examples. One would be, a couple that most people probably know are dopamine, and I think it's spelled like this, serotonin would be another example. So these neurotransmitters can be stimulated by particular activities. So things like lots of different types of drugs, illicit and illegal drugs, will lead to increases in dopamine levels. Something like serotonin, for example, if we see serotonin levels drop, it can lead to depression and sort of anger issues and mental issues. So these neurotransmitters can have quite a big impact and role on the body. So what we're going to see is these different types of neurotransmitters can be used to bridge that gap, that synapse between the axon and the dendrite. So we've got here, this is our impulse, reaches the end of an axon of a neuron, and then is converted into the form of a particular neurotransmitter, so a chemical. So these neurotransmitters, they will be enclosed in vesicles before making their way to the edge of the cell, and then through exocytosis will be dispelled from the cell, and they'll be able to cross over that synapse. Now, once those neurotransmitters have been expelled from the axon of the previous cell via exocytosis, they're going to make their way across the synapse and bind to a receptor on the surface of the membrane of the dendrite of the next neuron. So once those neurotransmitters are able to bind to a receptor, they're able to stimulate the required response within a dendrite, and then that chemical form, the neurotransmitter, is going to be returned to an impulse, and then we'll see that impulse continue to move along the dendrite through the neuron and onto the next neuron, so that that message can be relayed along. So that's the sort of, those are the main parts around synapses and the purpose of neurotransmitters in being able to turn that electrical impulse into a chemical form to bridge that synapse and continue to travel on via the receptor, binding to a receptor, and then onwards through a dendrite along to the next neuron.